few years back, I inherited a scroll. It was done for my father, who had recently passed away, by a monk friend of his in Korea. I was unable to read its stylized script, and for a while it sat on a brick wall of my Red Hook, Brooklyn home, more for what it represented than for what it meant. One day, I realized a stain was blossoming across the surface. It turned out to be the result of moisture trapped in the 19th century brick, combined with a precipitate of salt, a not uncommon phenomenon known as efflorescence. On removing the scroll and tipping it over in the name of conservation, I noticed a tear in the backing of the frame. In it was a note written in my mother's handwriting. It was written in English, Chinese, and Korean. Only after snow one can realize the purpose, principle of pine tree, and there is a difficulty one can see the big man's integrity, heart. Translation. Even now, I'm less interested in the content of the note than in the fact that the entropic stain on the scroll had somehow opened a pathway to looking at it differently. Could this be seen as an intersection of space and place? I asked myself. Much of my art practice has revolved around the idea of entropy and its would-be opposite, negentropy, or negative entropy, and how they might further be applied to thinking about space and place. From a performance video, Salt Transfer Cycle, in which I waited for elk to lick salt off my body as a way to transfer symbolic material into the bloodstream of a living thing, to traveling the 400 miles of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, to calculating the average amount of human energy per millisecond it took to walk against its flow of fossil fuel. The decline of the body across space contrasted with the crystalline precision of the numbers. Displacing a 200,000 pound block of marble that one could eventually experience from its interior. I have been consistently interested in how art practice could act as a documentation process. I wanted today to briefly introduce to you two recent projects that I feel embody this and share some of the thoughts and questions they generated for me. In 2014, I was invited to the Sharjah Biennial Foundation's annual March meeting in the port city of Sharjah, UAE, with the idea that I would develop a project for the upcoming Sharjah Biennial. I agreed on the understanding that I would be able to engage with the space over a period of time to more fully research and experience the place itself. The previous year, Hurricane Sandy had destroyed part of my home and studio, and even in Sharjah, the water seemed to be following me around. Working in the Gulf, though culturally new to me, seemed strangely appropriate. Over the course of a year, I made 6 visits to the region. Interested in undocumented histories and how the culture was examining its own identity, I looked first at desert valleys, completely covered in fossils that once formed the seafloor. And also researched ancient and contemporary irrigation systems, the former buried by restless entropy of the desert. I spent time with teams of archaeologists from Europe and the region who had been excavating and mapping these submerged drawings in space, and was struck by the combination of fragile stability and settlement they indicated, as well as the movement of nomadic people. In establishing a site for the project, my thinking kept returning to the port of Sharjah itself. The movement of migrant labor, documented and undocumented in the port, paralleled some of the impressions from my time in the desert. A large derelict warehouse site in a less developed part of the port was found. My intention for the project was to try and avoid adding material mass and rather use a series of gestures to intervene in the space. And I began by mapping composites of the irrigation systems I had seen in the desert and oases. I'd been working with silvering surfaces with chemistry as a way to amplify light and highlight perception of surfaces in space. I decided to mirror an entire wall of the warehouse. Since it is a wet process, unlike silver-based photographic processes combined with traditional mirroring, it would require a collaborative effort of 21 people simultaneously sensitizing and then silvering the wall over a 2.5-hour period. In order to keep sync with each other's movements, Arabic Khalij rhythms mixed with New York breakbeat drums were blasted through a PA system on site. The final intervention was titled Locale Inscribed. It unfolded something like this. And resulted in a layer of deposited silver of around an atom in thickness. The sensitivity of the silver mirrored wall emphasized the texture of the wall and the marks of the hands that made it, even as it was evidence of the labor that created it. Channels excavated led through the space, ending or beginning at the base of the mirrored wall, which was in turn excavated to the waterline of the surrounding port, revealing the foundations of the building and highlighting the site's location on the water. I was interested in it both destabilizing and providing origin. As a meditation on space, the viewer's shadowy reflected presences were meant to merge with the site and be further contextualized by the sunlight of Sharjah itself. The wall amplified the lowest of light, and the space was left accessible day and night. While the Sharjah project's process of research and intervention involved inscribing and layering to examine place and parallel identities, questions for me remained about the meaning of identity in the face of parallel and overwritten histories. Curator Koyo Kuo and I had been in discussion since meeting in Sharjah, and the following winter I had an opportunity to begin investigating such questions with a project for our EVA, an Irish biennial exhibition in another port city, Limerick, in Ireland. It was to be held in the centenary of the Easter Rising, a significant moment of armed insurrection to end British colonial rule. Like Sharjah, I was interested in a long-term engagement with the place and site itself. After preliminary research and meeting with local historians, a Victorian sailor's home was selected. I was interested in its location near the once thriving and cosmopolitan port, an early center of diversity in its part of the city. Perhaps more significantly was its British origins and intended function as a place to protect sailors from vice. Could it also be seen as isolating from corrupting outside influence on a cultural scale? Its intended use was never fulfilled, and after serving as a police and militia barracks, was now in a state of stasis between being gutted of interior detail and slated for eventual restoration. In the site, multiple layers of history coexisted in the stripped building. A stone dedication plaque in honor of its British patronage reminded me of the portal created by the hole in the back of the scroll. Where would this portal lead? As the home's physical state was causing me to look at the material as a means of examining heritage and overwritten historic identities, I drew a line to the British Museum, an ultimate repository of of material and objects drawn from colonial history. Further continuing to ruminate about water, I began to think of the building in relation to the human body, itself largely water. Exploring the building, I located piled and stored architraves that had been cut from the building's interior during its gutting and reinstalled them at a remove from their original positions. Ideas of mirroring and instability were important, and I likened these to the ribs of the building's corpus. Next, wanted to create a place within a place by using objects that mirror their immediate surroundings of the port itself. The objects themselves related to movement and migration. Several colonized themselves by moss or other flora. These were the building's organs. Moving through this body upstairs to an inaccessible floor, I projected the body's head. Video images of an emaciated Buddha sculpture from Pakistan shot on display in the British Museum and projected onto translucent scrims. I'd like to conclude with some parting thoughts and questions. How to pose questions of place and locations that are so overwritten by generations of trauma or conflict over that very place's identity. What are alternatives to synthesis, homogenization, unification, and assimilation? Can there be simultaneous pluralistic viewpoints? And is it possible to combine the entropic nature of time and space and the negative entropy implied by place?